Tampopo is a 1985 Japanese film directed by Itami Juzo, and while this film is from the heartland of the 80 decade, we don't have any spandex, aerobics, Atari 200,000s, or neon-lit DeLorean cars speeding through a poorly rendered CG boulevard. But holy moly, does this lady clean up good. Go watch the movie if you have time. It's essentially required viewing if you want to better understand Japan. It might give you a better sense of the culture and society than any anime could. It might also teach you a thing or two. Tampopo is a story about the tried and true method of continually developing yourself even when the society has gone a bit off the rails. For Japan, the 1980s were an era of living the high life, in a time of enormous change in the country. The people were experiencing the peak of a post-war economic steroid session, a time that has become known as the bubble. Money seemed to be pouring in from all four corners of the earth, and the culture was being evolved or mutated at a rate never before seen. The Japan of old is long gone, and now we have to say hello to Hello Kitty, life in trains, karaoke nights, wacky TV commercials, and a business culture that leaves many people on the edge of total exhaustion. While the setting is a time of incredible change for the Japanese, it's still an honest portrayal of what values and stories the people developed over millennia, and what they're trying to hang on to as things get a bit weird. We are introduced to the story, and as it turns out, it's a classic Western stranger comes to town kind of thing. Also, it's a heist movie. And Rocky. Like any other saddle-up partner cowboy stories, the hero arrives from a long drive, tussles with the outlaws, cleans up shop, partners up with the good people still left in town, and makes the best out of a bad situation. But the journey we are following is not the cowboys, but instead the journey of Tampopo, a salt-of-the-earth woman, and the revamping of her quaint ramen shop. The restaurant is like totally a symbol for society, and the dude Clint Eastwood just punches people. The story is a Rocky-esque rags to riches tale of working your butt off. We also have a bunch of side notes that are just sex. Hotel sex, dentist lady sex, oyster sex, eggy sex. And none of this nasty stuff makes it into our main narrative. The only time sex is brought into the equation, the cowboy sees Tampopo's undies and feels ashamed of his own depravity. Tampopo is better than that. Here is a lady that goes through the ringer, does some jazzercise, and recruits a team of specialized operatives for her balls-to-the-wall ludicrous plan, the ultimate heist to craft the perfect ramen noodle recipe. And maybe with their powers combined, the team can somehow show that hard work, teamwork, and a bit of sneakiness makes the dream work. Here's what I've got. Tampopo is a lot of things. It's a classic spaghetti western mixed with a slice of life whimsicality and a whole lot of erotic gastronomy to boot. It's cool if you discover new fetishes. I'm not judging. It certainly is a movie about the Japanese culture and history, but like so many detailed exposés on one particular corner of the earth, the film becomes more of a universal lesson that we can all get behind. And it's all centered around food. I know that David Lynch would be disappointed with this whole spiel, but food is everything in this movie. You get real, Mr. Lynch. How about that? Every lesson and situation revolves around food. Whenever the film is exploring some part of society, any symbolism or lesson, it centers around cuisine. Food is sex, hard work, freedom, social rules, temptation, family, success, the last words of a dying man, and finally the emergence of a new generation. And we're left with a question. Why would so much meaning and importance revolve around food? The story here is about ramen. All reconstruction, all rivalries, competition, secrets, improvement, it's all ramen. A piece of Japanese cuisine that has a bit more history than meets the eye. Way back in the day, foods like sushi or ramen were actually seen as cheap street foods. They were not seen as a kind of cultural landmark, a piece of swanky and delectable cultural export that's easily digested and accepted into other cultures. These foods were not viewed as a kind of delicacy. They've undergone a rebirth, as it would seem, in the last few decades. So what happened? There is a large event in Japan's history called World War II. The horrific conditions of that war led to the deaths of, let me check my notes, many people. The food production system collapsed under the confusion and horrible chaos that was that war. Cities couldn't actually bring in enough food. Tokyo was not a good place to be during that war, from the constant fire bombings from the sky and the lack of resources and lack of food and lack of everything that people found around themselves. There just wasn't enough to eat. Things got fairly desperate, and a lot of people experienced a situation that very few of us understand. I don't understand what this would be like. If you want a good explanation of this circumstance, please check out the movie Grave of the Fireflies. It is a hand-drawn punch to the gut, a horrifying, terribly depressing, and beautiful story about this little time. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen, and I never want to see it again. To put it lightly, things were very rough back then, and those events took their toll on the people and still have an influence in Japan. One of the most beloved children's icons is Anpanman, a character made of the common Japanese food bean jam bread, and with a creator that had experienced the starvations of the time would dream about the image of tasty bean jam bread when his family had nothing other than cabbage broth. The character that he created is a superhero, one with the power of flight, super strength, and also the power to tear a piece of himself off to give anyone who is hungry. The history and downfall of Imperial Japan has made a larger effect than we might realize. So people work hard. They want to keep everything moving, and they don't want society to get to that place again. Your entire system can spiral downwards very quickly, and everything can get much worse than most of us can imagine. It took a while for that dust to settle in Japan and for people to start rebuilding in the aftermath. It took some time, but things got going at a pace that almost no country had seen before. This meant more money, more jobs, and especially more food. And what do you do with the cheap foods that you once took for granted? You make it into an art form. One of the areas that is changing in Japan is, well, everything. The land is in a whole new place, and this leads to a lot of new expression and experimentation. It also leads to a lot of confusion and insecurity as you try to get your sea legs. But in a time when every facet of life is shifting at a faster and faster pace, it might be foolish to expect any kind of stability to emerge. It's getting crazy out there, y'all. The country that had prided itself in stability, its rules, structures, and hierarchy of authority is currently having that system shaken up just a tad. The people are in a kind of Wild West, a distinct level of uncertainty. With that kind of uncertainty, you best be using the lessons of the past. What has worked for thousands of years might still be of some value right now. In other words, get on the ladder.
誰でも自分のはしごを持ってんのよね。そのはしごの精一杯上の方で生きている人もいれば、はしごがあることも気づかずに地べたに寝転んでる人もいるのよ。
While the story here is shuffled along with the imagery of delicious morsels and recipes, at its core there is an age-old story about rebirth and rebuilding, because that is what Japan went through. From a bombed-out whirlwind of confusion to a bustling metropolis. Started from the bottom, now we here. This is a grand old story. Somebody wants to improve, to push it to the limit, so they set off on the journey full of gusto, and the interesting people they pick up along the way end up slingshotting them to some kind of success. This is Tampopo's story. It's not perfect, but what other options does she have? Mediocrity is not a good place to settle. If you can find the time to perfect your craft, the world will reward you for that. Perseverance is the game, and the game is still worth playing. Get on the ladder. You certainly do not have to do this alone, but from the looks of it, playing the game is something you have to do. Keep working on it, y'all.